When I first moved into the neighborhood, I thought the HOA, Homeowners Association, was simply there to keep the community neat and organized. Things were fine until I parked my boat on the lake. Within a week, I received a stern letter stating my boat violated community aesthetics and that I had to remove it or face daily fines. The irony? What the HOA didn't realize was that my family had owned the lake long before the neighborhood was ever built. The developers never purchased the water rights. They only developed the land around it. So when the HOA tried to enforce their guidelines, I reminded them, politely but firmly, that every homeowner in the community technically used my lake for fishing, kayaking, and scenic views. My boat wasn't violating the guidelines. If anything, the HOA was in violation for using a privately owned body of water without permission. The HOA backed down immediately. The rules they thought they controlled stopped at the shoreline, and suddenly they realized that their authority didn't extend as far as they assumed. It became a powerful reminder that before enforcing rules, you better know exactly who has the real ownership and authority. The clash of authority versus ownership is best understood through the tension between perception and reality when it comes to property rights. In many communities, homeowners associations, or HOAs, are created to maintain order, enforce aesthetic guidelines, and preserve property values. These organizations can wield significant influence, and because they operate under bylaws and covenants that residents agree to when moving in, most homeowners assume that the HOA's word is final. But what often gets overlooked is that authority is not absolute. It is conditional and bound by law. This means that while an HOA might dictate the color of a fence, the placement of a mailbox, or the size of a shed, its power does not extend beyond the actual property rights it governs. Ownership, particularly when it involves unique features such as land, water rights, or easements, can override or at least complicate an HOA's assumed jurisdiction. The situation with the boat on the lake perfectly illustrates this clash. The HOA believed it had the right to regulate what residents could and could not place on the water. They treated the lake as if it were community property, falling neatly under the scope of their guidelines. But property law does not operate on assumption. The reality was that the lake was privately owned, predating the creation of the neighborhood and its association. The HOA's authority applied only to what had been deeded to them and agreed upon in the governing documents. Since the lake was never legally transferred to the HOA's care, it remained outside of their control. What looked like a rule violation was in fact a misunderstanding of jurisdiction. This example highlights an important educational lesson. Authority without proper grounding in ownership is limited. Many people confuse social or organizational authority with actual legal authority. A school principal may have authority over students during the school day, but not once those students go home. Similarly, an HOA's authority ends where private ownership begins. When the HOA tried to enforce its community guidelines on the lake, it exceeded its legal scope. The owner of the lake was under no obligation to conform to those rules, because ownership carries rights that organizational authority cannot easily override. Understanding this distinction is crucial, not just for homeowners dealing with associations, but for anyone navigating systems of governance. Authority figures, whether HOAs, local councils, or even workplace managers, derive their power from agreements, contracts, or laws. Ownership, however, is rooted in property rights, which are legally recognized and enforceable in courts. When these two forces collide, ownership typically carries greater weight because it is backed by deeds, titles, and long-established principles of property law. This clash also speaks to the importance of clarity. HOAs often rely on the assumption that residents will comply without question, not realizing that individuals may possess rights that extend beyond the association's reach. For example, water rights, mineral rights, and easements can all create exceptions to what seems like an HOA's blanket authority. Without careful research, an HOA can easily overstep and open itself up to disputes or even legal challenges. On the flip side, homeowners benefit from understanding their rights because compliance should not be blind. Knowing where authority ends and ownership begins allows people to stand firm when rules are misapplied. The educational takeaway here is that authority should never be mistaken for ownership. An organization may seem powerful, but that power must be rooted in actual, legally recognized control. When authority attempts to override ownership, it often exposes its own limits. In the case of the boat and the lake, what began as a simple warning letter turned into a powerful lesson for the HOA. Community rules do not erase property rights. For everyone else, the lesson is equally valuable. Always distinguish between what people say they control and what they legally own. This distinction not only prevents unnecessary conflict, but also reinforces respect for both governance and individual rights. The importance of research is one that cannot be emphasized enough when it comes to property rights, community guidelines, or any situation involving rules and authority. At the heart of most conflicts between individuals and organizations lies a simple lack of understanding about the legal or contractual boundaries that govern behavior. Many people assume that because a letter comes from an HOA, a government office, or even a corporate manager, it must be valid and enforceable. But authority is not simply about who issues the directive, it is about whether that directive is backed by proper jurisdiction and law. This is where research becomes the most powerful tool an individual can use. Knowing the rules, knowing the law, and knowing how they intersect can often turn what feels like a powerless situation into one where you have clarity and control. In the story of the boat and the lake, the conflict arose precisely because the HOA failed to do their research. They issued a violation notice assuming that the lake was part of their community's common property, but they had never actually verified ownership. Had they reviewed the development's property deeds or examined the original agreements, they would have discovered that the lake was privately owned and not within their scope of governments. Instead, they relied on assumption, which left them vulnerable to embarrassment and legal challenge. This shows how failing to conduct proper research before taking action can undermine an organization's credibility. For homeowners or anyone subject to community rules, the same principle applies. Research provides protection. When you know your rights, you are far less likely to be intimidated by rules that do not apply to you. For instance, many HOA documents are public records, and homeowners are entitled to request copies of governing documents, such as covenants, conditions, and restrictions. These documents outline exactly what the HOA can and cannot regulate. By reviewing them carefully, a homeowner can distinguish between legitimate guidelines and overreach. Without doing this homework, people often comply automatically, even when the demand has no legal basis. Research also builds confidence. Consider how differently a conversation feels when you can cite the exact page and section of a contract or law compared to when you simply argue on the basis of opinion. When faced with authority, vague objections often fail, but specific, well-supported responses carry weight. In the case of the lake, being able to point to the ownership documents immediately shifted the balance of power. Instead of being treated as a resident in violation, the lake owner became the party holding undeniable authority. That shift only happens when facts are firmly in hand, and those facts come from research. Another important reason for research is that it clarifies obligations, not just rights. Sometimes the rules really do apply, and ignoring them can lead to fines, penalties, or even lawsuits. By taking the time to study governing documents, zoning laws, or property boundaries, individuals can avoid unnecessary conflict and ensure compliance where it is genuinely required. Research is not just about fighting back against unfair authority, it is about understanding understanding the landscape so that decisions are made wisely. In an educational sense, this principle extends far beyond HOAs. Whenever rules or regulations come into play, whether in school, at work, or in business contracts, research provides the foundation for making informed choices. Blind compliance may keep the peace temporarily, but it often allows organizations to overstep. On the other hand, blind resistance without facts can quickly backfire. Research creates the balance, allowing people to comply when it is appropriate and push back when it is not. The lesson is simple but profound. Never act on assumption. Whether you're enforcing rules as part of an organization or responding to rules as an individual, always verify the facts. Authority without proper research is shaky at best, and individuals who fail to research their rights risk being governed by rules that don't truly apply. In the long run, those who do their homework are the ones who protect their interests, stand firm with confidence, and resolve conflicts with clarity. Power in knowledge is one of those concepts that seems simple on the surface, but its impact becomes most visible in moments of conflict or negotiation. Knowledge itself is not just the accumulation of facts, it is the ability to understand those facts, apply them at the right time, and use them to shape outcomes. In situations where authority and ownership collide, knowledge often becomes the decisive factor. When you know the details of your rights, the limitations of another party's authority, or the historical context of a situation, you are no longer reacting blindly to rules or demands. Instead, you are operating from a position of strength, and strength rooted in knowledge is extremely difficult to undermine. The lake and boat dispute serves as a perfect example of this. At first, the HOA appeared to hold the power. They sent an official letter, invoked community guidelines, and implied that fines would follow if the demand was ignored. For many people, such a letter feels final and intimidating because authority backed by an organization carries weight. However, once the homeowner brought knowledge into the equation, specifically the knowledge of who actually owned the lake, the power dynamic shifted instantly. The HOA no longer held the upper hand. They were exposed as operating on assumptions rather than facts, while the homeowner had documented proof that the lake was outside their jurisdiction. This is what knowledge does. It flips the balance of power by replacing fear and uncertainty with clarity and confidence. This principle extends far beyond homeowners associations. In any system where rules are enforced, whether in schools, workplaces, or governments, the individuals who hold and apply knowledge wield influence. For example, in a workplace, an employee who knows labor laws or company policies cannot be pressured into unfair treatment as easily as someone unaware of their rights. In education, a student who understands grading policies and academic procedures can advocate for themselves more effectively. In civic life, a citizen who knows how local laws work or how to access public records can hold officials accountable. The common thread in all these examples is that knowledge protects, empowers, and creates leverage. What makes knowledge so powerful is not only that it equips people to defend themselves, but also that it forces authority to act responsibly. Organizations rely on compliance, and compliance is easiest when people do not question or investigate. When someone demonstrates that they know the rules as well as or better than the authority figure, that raises the standard of accountability. The HOA in the story could no longer rely on vague threats once confronted with the fact that the lake was privately owned. Their only option was to adjust their approach, because knowledge left them no room to maneuver. In this sense, knowledge acts as a check against misuse of power. Another aspect of knowledge as power is the confidence it creates. Uncertainty often leads to hesitation or submission, even when you're in the right. People who lack knowledge of their rights may comply simply to avoid conflict, which allows authority to expand beyond its true limits. On the other hand, when you know the details, you can stand firm without fear because your position is grounded in verifiable fact. Confidence backed by knowledge is very different from stubbornness or opinion. It is steady, persuasive, and difficult to challenge. This kind of confidence is what allows individuals to negotiate from strength, not weakness. Finally, knowledge is not just about defense. It is about opportunity. Understanding property rights, laws, or policies can open doors to possibilities that others overlook. In the story, owning the lake was not only a shield against HOA overreach, but also a unique advantage. It meant the homeowner had influence over a resource the entire community valued. This transformed what looked like a disadvantage, the HOA trying to regulate his boat, into a reminder of how much leverage he actually possessed. Knowledge doesn't just protect, it can also enhance and expand what you can do with what you own or control. The educational takeaway is clear. In any interaction involving authority, knowledge is the invisible weight on the scale that can tip the outcome. Without it, authority appears absolute and unshakable. With it, authority is revealed as conditional and limited. When you take the time to learn the facts, understand the boundaries, and apply that information effectively, you gain real power, the kind of power that cannot be easily ignored or taken away. Lessons in respect and balance emerge as the natural conclusion to any situation where authority and ownership collide. When people live together in a shared community, rules are necessary to maintain harmony, protect property values, and ensure fairness. At the same time, individual rights and ownership cannot simply be ignored in the name of uniformity. Finding balance means recognizing that rules must be applied with respect for the unique circumstances of each resident, while individual homeowners must also respect the broader needs of the community. Without this dual respect, tension escalates, and small disagreements can grow into conflicts that damage relationships and trust. The boat and lake story demonstrates this principle vividly. On one side, the HOA acted from a place of wanting to enforce consistency. They believed the boat violated aesthetics, which, in their view, might harm the community's overall appearance. On the other side, the homeowner was exercising a legitimate right, since he owned the lake where the boat was docked. The clash occurred because respect for boundaries was missing. The HOA assumed authority where it had none, while failing to consider the homeowner's rights. The situation only resolved when the facts were clarified, but the larger lesson is that balance requires both sides to respect one another's roles and limitations before making demands or decisions. Respect is not just about politeness, it is about recognizing legitimacy. For an HOA, this means ensuring that rules are grounded in actual governing documents and legal authority, not assumptions or traditions. For homeowners, it means acknowledging that they chose to live in a community with shared standards and that some level of compromise is part of collective living. When respect is mutual, balance naturally follows. The HOA enforces rules within its boundaries, homeowners assert their rights without disregarding the collective good, and conflicts are minimized. Balance also requires communication. Too often, HOAs communicate through formal violation letters that sound more like threats than conversations, while homeowners respond with defensiveness. This cycle escalates tension rather than resolving it. A more balanced approach would involve dialogue, asking questions, seeking clarification, and sharing perspectives before issuing ultimatums. For example, had the HOA approached the lake owner to discuss concerns instead of immediately issuing a violation, they would have learned that the lake was privately owned. This respectful communication could have prevented conflict altogether. Another lesson in balance is the idea of proportionality. Just because an HOA has the authority to enforce a rule does not mean it should do so rigidly in every case. Rules exist to serve the community, not the other way around. When enforcement becomes more about control than about promoting harmony, respect is lost and resentment builds. Similarly, homeowners who constantly challenge every rule without considering the broader benefits risk undermining community cohesion. Balance means applying rules and exercising rights in ways that are fair, reasonable, and considerate of others. Respect and balance also extend to long-term thinking. HOAs should remember that their credibility depends on fair and consistent enforcement, not overreach. If they abuse their power, residents lose trust, which weakens the effectiveness of the association.
Homeowners should remember that their reputation within the community matters as well. Even if they win a dispute, acting without regard for neighbors can create lasting friction. In this sense, balance is not just about winning arguments, it is about building sustainable relationships where authority and ownership can coexist peacefully. Finally, the larger educational lesson is that communities thrive when respect is prioritized over control. The boat on the lake was not just a symbol of ownership, it became a symbol of how quickly balance can tip when authority ignores respect. By learning from such moments, both organizations and individuals can approach future issues with greater wisdom. HOAs can practice humility in acknowledging their limits, and homeowners can exercise their rights while still valuing the community's well-being. Together, this creates an environment where differences do not automatically lead to disputes, but instead invite collaboration and understanding. In the end, respect and balance are not abstract ideals. They are practical tools for living together successfully. When rules are applied fairly, when rights are recognized fully, and when communication is conducted respectfully, conflicts diminish and communities flourish. The boat and lake may have sparked a dispute, but the true lesson is that lasting harmony depends on everyone's willingness to respect boundaries, acknowledge rights, and balance individual freedom with collective good.